Hello and welcome back to the shed. In today's episode we're going to be building a shooting board. So we're going to be building a shooting board today, and a shooting board is a workshop jig that's particularly important for hand tool woodworkers to square off the ends of boards after they've hand sawed them to get a very accurate and clean joint between the two boards on the end if you're marking dovetails or doing mortise and tenon work. So for this particular one, I'm going to be using this 19mm MDF as the base. I've got some 8mm plywood here, which is just the red oak veneered. It's just some leftover that I've got. And I'm going to be making the fence out of this piece of jarrah that we've got here. So the whole purpose of the shooting board is that you have a baseboard that the plane rides onto like this. And then you have a shorter board that comes up to it that the plane rests up against, so you can make sure that your plane is always square to this. And then you have a fence up the front here that holds your workpiece square to the plane, so you can square off the edge at 90 degrees. And the whole purpose of this lip, not only is it to register the plane, it's also to get past this about 7 or 8 mils that is on the side of a conventional bench plane, lifting the blade up. So let's get started. So I've already got this piece that was cut, and it's a piece of scrap that's had something screwed to it before, but that doesn't matter. You can use a nice new piece. Thicker is going to be better because it'll just make sure that it stays flatter for longer. But I find 19mm plywood stays fairly square and flat, so that's all good. Now, the only thing that really matters when you're actually putting this part of it together is that you have enough gap here to run your hand plane into. Enough gap on the side here so you can get your hand plane right in there and register. So what I'm going to do is, because it doesn't really matter whether any of these are square or anything, this is the factory edge which I checked to start with, and this is actually dead straight. So the only thing when doing this part of it is that you need to make sure you've got a nice straight piece here, or at least secure it square and flat and straight when you actually attach it to the baseboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and we'll glue this down, and over here it's overlapped here, which doesn't really matter. So what I'm going to do is, after I've glued it on, we'll just cut that off and then plane it all flush. So I'm just going to be using a bit of glue here, and then I'll just put a few screws in the back of it just to hold it so I can keep continuing on with the build. Now you want to make sure you get a nice amount of glue here, but you don't want to get too much that you get a lot of squeeze out along this edge, so I'd keep the glue just away from the edge where you're going to be gluing it. Scrap piece of wood works well for spreading the glue. You want to get a good amount of glue on here, but you don't need to go crazy. Going to remove this bit here so I don't get squeezed out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a couple of clamps on here, and then I'll turn it over and drill the screws in. So I had a few issues with those screws not holding it on, so I ended up having to clamp it anyway. So it's been about 20 minutes, this glue's drier, so we're going to remove these clamps and start just screwing this plywood up to the MDF. So I'm just going to grab my crosscut saw and just chop this edge off here and then plane it smooth. You always want to be using a crosscut saw when you're cutting plywood because you're always going across the grain. Yes, it'll go slower on the rip cut veneers, but that doesn't really affect things too much. So now that we've gone ahead and we've glued this piece of plywood on and we've smoothed it all off with the edges, it's time to do our fence. Now, our fence is on this particular shooting board because this one's going to be a 90-degree shooting board. You can also do them with a fence that allows you to shoot 45s for making a nice tight joint as well. So the whole idea of the fence is to keep your work square to the plane. So when you're shooting your material like this, the fence holds it and it supports the outside edge of the fibers and stops them from blowing out. And it also holds it at 90 degrees to make sure that you have a nice square, even flat surface when you're finished. So what I'm going to do is use a bit of this jarrah here. I've already checked this edge here and come in with the square and it's already 90 degrees along here. This is square to this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this section off. I'll do another one to put on the bottom as a cleat, which will just hold it on the front of the bench, which I'm just going to use this piece of off-cut MDF that I have here for that, because the only thing that you really need a nice hard fence for is the material you push it up against. However, you could use pine if you wanted to. It's just going to last a little bit longer if it's out of a hardwood. Any hardwood will work. It doesn't have to be super hard, but in this case I've got jarrah, so I'm going to be using that. So sometimes it's easier to have a square that's a little bit larger so you can actually sort of clamp it there and hold it and make sure it doesn't move while you glue your fence on. What I will be doing is I'll glue the fence on and then I will just put a couple of screws into it from the back to make sure it doesn't move. Now when placing the fence, I'm actually going to have it about 60 mil back from the edge. That just means that when the plane's coming through and you've hit your material and you push right past, that it's not going to want to tip around on the edge like this. So let's go ahead and do that. Tap it back into position. So I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of screws in here. So now that we've gone ahead and attached the fence, we're going to flip it over and I'm going to attach this piece of MDF as a little cleat, catches it on the edge of the bench to stop your shooting board moving forward, which is all you really need because you're only pushing your plane forward. So that stops it pushing off the other side of the bench. The other thing you can do with it is then clamp it in your vise if you need to. So I've already got this piece that's scrap, which happens to be the same thickness as this, or same width. So I'm going to go ahead and attach that. So now that I've run around and we just chamfer all the edges, you don't want to take too much off this front edge here where your workpiece goes, because then it stops it supporting the work properly. And then just do a couple of runs on the edges of this plywood as well, just here. And it just takes that sharp edge off so it's smoother to the touch. Now, one last thing we need to address is back here. Now, one of the reasons that you use a shooting board is obviously to keep your work at 90 degrees to the fence. But just here, as the blade comes by, the whole idea that the fence is here is to support the outside fibers when you're going across the grain, so you don't end up ripping these outer fibers out. So when you're coming through with your plane on your board here, your plane will sometimes catch this outside edge if it's not 100% perfect. So in some cases, this edge here, it might pay you to take a chisel and just take this corner off. So now that we've done this, we've put the cleat on the back. As you can see, I push here and it won't go off the bench now. So now I'll show you exactly how this works. So as you can see here, this board looks square, but it's not quite. It's out at this edge here. So we put that up against our fence, hold our plane here, push it up against it. It's a nice smooth flat edge here, which is now completely square. So it's hard to bring that up on the camera, but that is nice and square across now. So now that I've shown you how the shooting board works, we can now go ahead, put a finish on, and then we're good to go. You've got a nice jig ready to use in the shop. So, there you have it, folks. That's how you create a shooting board, which is a very useful jig for you to use in the workshop. Primarily for hand tool users, you can't do without it, especially if you want nice, tight, clean joinery. But it can even be useful in a power tool shop if you have a lesser quality blade, or you end up getting chip out on your timber. You can use a shooting board to clean up the edge of the boards before you decide to do joinery. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what you saw in this video and would like to support me and allow me to continue making these great videos for you, please consider liking and subscribing and checking out my Facebook and Instagram pages. I also encourage you, if you have any questions related to the content in any of my videos, please leave it in the comments below and I'll try to get back to you. Thank you.